Chapter 8. To the Ends of the Earth.
Proclaim, give praise, and say, O Lord, save your people, the remnant of Israel. Behold, I will bring them from the north country and gather them from the ends of the earth. Jeremiah 31, verse 7 to 8.
Maria, one of our team members, had been speaking to me for some time about the Jewish people in yet another former Soviet republic, Kazakhstan. I don't want to know about Kazakhstan, I told her. First, we have to consolidate our existing work. It is a huge country, bigger than all of Western Europe and predominantly Muslim. But Maria continued to nudge me about Nebuchadnezzar's involvement. Reluctantly, I decided one day to add it to my prayer diary. As I was making the entry, I was not a little surprised to see it was on the day we were called to pray for this very nation. Early in 1995, Elsa and I flew into the city of Karaganda in the centre of Kazakhstan in a propeller-driven Aeroflot aircraft. The hostess brought drinks. It was only water, in a not very appetising plastic mug, which was then rinsed and reused for the other passengers. Strangely, food and drink do not seem to have the same importance to us as in the West. When we are on the Lord's assignments, we are consumed with our task. We joyfully accept food and living conditions that we would never put up with back home. I must confess, we sometimes call this company not Aeroflot, but Aeroflop. As a frequent traveller with this airline, I could add many pages to this book sharing some of our eventful flight experiences. To sum up, flight delays, cancellation of actual flights, and even closure of whole airports due to lack of fuel or weather conditions. None of these are unusual. Often there are extra passengers standing for the entire flight as paying guests of the captain. I jokingly inquire of my wife whether she has packed our screwdriver. We cover each flight in prayer, knowing that when we are in the perfect will of the Father, there is no safer place for us on all the earth, even on an Aeroflop plane. As we stepped out of the aircraft in Karaganda, waiting for us on the tarmac was the leader of the Jewish community, Leonid, who later became a dear and trusted and a loyal representative of Ebenezer. At the end of our visit, Leonid embraced me warmly and said, "One day, my grandchildren will know that Gustav has come to Karaganda to call the Jews home to Israel." Through our visits, we have seen firsthand the survival battle of the people living in this harsh land. Doctors, teachers and pensioners had not been paid for 6 to 8 months. The infrastructure was collapsing. The electricity and water supplies were cut. There had been no cooking gas in the homes for a year, and in severe weather conditions many homes and offices had no heating. By now many of the Jewish people had realised it was time to leave. The Lord used this strong bond of friendship in the following year to bring out 1,000 olim from that mountainous land. I can still see the face of a Jewish lady in her early 50s who had adopted 3 street children. She looked hopefully to me and said, "I want to go home, but only if I can take these 3 children with me." For a fleeting moment, I thought such a desire to be impossible. She had no documents. She had picked up these little children off the street and did not even know their full names. How would it be possible to secure Israeli visas in such circumstances? It was many months later when our representative telephoned me and told me that this lady and her children would be on our next flight. Tears welled up in my eyes. God had again made the impossible possible. During those months, the shipping line continued to flourish, and when I was due to fly out to Odessa for the last sailing of 1995, I knew that I'd be put under extreme pressure. Our volunteers, Israeli shipping partners, the owners of the Dmitry Shostakovich, and the owners of the transit camp in Odessa were all asking me, "When will we sail again?" But every time I inquired of the Lord, I just couldn't get an answer. The night before, I cried out to the Lord, "Give me a clear sign what to do." Elsa and I had to leave the next morning at 4 a.m. for Heathrow Airport. When I awoke to my amazement, my otherwise reliable Swiss watch had come to a standstill, and my morning reading in daily watchwords was, "Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord." I knew God had spoken, and it was no longer a problem for me. Some were disappointed, but I just knew we had to wait. I do not dare make a move until the time the Lord gives the revelation. If I go against what he has shown me, my life is not worth living. At the same time, we found that we did not have sufficient funds to pay the final sailing bill. God had always provided through the years, chiefly by the small gifts of faithful believers, but now we came under increasing pressure. Elsa and I were considering selling our Swiss apartment, which we had bought some years earlier for our retirement and had paid for over a period of 20 years. Elsa, being a wise woman, said, "Let's fast and pray for a week." I will never forget that after 5 days of fasting, an excited Beverly telephoned me to say that Ebenezer had received a substantial legacy, which would completely clear all our debts. We were overjoyed. It was as if the Lord gave us back our lovely apartment. Somehow I was reminded of Abraham, who put Isaac on the altar, and God abundantly blessed him for it. Then in early January, I had the release that we would sail again, and I would start my negotiations. Lord, should we use the same vessel? I jumped in my car to drive to the office and switched on the radio. Usually I listened to worship tapes, but I enjoyed the particular piece of classical music that was playing. The announcer came on and said, that was by Dmitri Shostakovich, the Russian composer for whom the ship was named. I knew the Lord was saying we were to move ahead. He knows the end from the beginning. On our return to Odessa, we found that mighty Blasco was now in such financial difficulty it had started to dispose of some of its passenger fleet. This created competition, and the new owners of these vessels were eager to do business with us. We were able to charter the Dmitri Shostakovich in 1996 on terms that saved money and made our lives easier than if we'd accepted the contract offered in December. Even though we were now established in 3 republics, I found my heart was still stirring with an impression, go where no one else is going. I knew that operations in difficult areas wouldn't bring back the majority of Olim to Israel. But I began to see that Operation Exodus, as Johannes once put it, is more than anything else a prophetic sign. Our calling is to open the way like a plough and bring back the most impossible cases. I thought I'd test the waters when I saw the senior official for immigration at the Israeli embassy in Moscow. In which part of the former Soviet Unions do Jews most need help to make Aliyah? I asked him. Siberia, he answered without any hesitation. It struck a chord in my heart. A few weeks later, I was at the Israeli embassy in Kiev, asked the same question, and instantly received the same reply. I well remember the first time Elsa and I visited Siberia. Following the Mediterranean sky sailings, the Lord had led us to explore many parts of the former Soviet Union, and we travelled right across Russia on the Trans-Siberian Railway. On the first leg of our journey, we sat on the hard wooden benches of an old second-class carriage from Riga to Minsk. It was approaching midnight, and, forgive the expression, my bottom hurt a bit by that time. I was tired, and I looked at Elsa. And as I looked at my wife, I started laughing. I couldn't stop it. I looked at her, and she giggled as well. After a while I said, either we are utterly mad, or this is the Lord. Finally we arrived at our hotel in Minsk. I had already gone to bed when the Lord reminded me that I hadn't done my evening reading. So I sat up, turned on the light, and read that day's selection from 1 Corinthians 1, verse 27.
But God has chosen the foolish things of the world to put to shame the wise. And God has chosen the weak things of this world to put to shame the things which are mighty.
It made me feel good. We spent 8 days and nights on trains. It was bumpy. We couldn't read because the book would be shaking too much. It was best just to look out of the window. There was nothing to eat. We'd buy food when we stopped at a station for 15 minutes. When I stepped off the train, I was never sure whether the platform was going up or down, or if it was me. Poorly dressed women would stand there with whatever they had to sell. I remember one woman selling mashed potatoes from a pot in her baby's pushchair. I caught her eye and saw desperation. During this journey, Elsa and I made a side trip to see the Jewish autonomous region created by Stalin back in 1928. He moved Jews to the far end of Siberia, on the border with China, the middle of nowhere. We felt led to go there and visit the capital, Birobidzhan. It was quite an experience to pull into the train station and see the name of the city written in both Russian and Hebrew. When we got there, we had 3 addresses, possible contacts. At the first 2 places, we couldn't find anybody. We went to the third one and met the leader of the entire Jewish community of the area. I shared my heart with him. He asked us to stay for a beautiful meal, and then he said, "Tonight we are celebrating Shavuot at the synagogue. It will be packed. Will you come with us?" It was God's timing. The Lord had sent us all the way to the far end of Siberia, exactly on that night when they would celebrate, when their little wooden synagogue would be full. And I had liberty that night to tell them, now is the time to go home. We neared the end of our journey and were looking forward to flying to Japan the next day. Elsa and I must have spent about 200 hours on the train. Very often they played hard rock music in the coaches. It is good for headaches. Suddenly the rock music went quiet. Then, in the last few minutes, they started to play Handel's beautiful Hallelujah chorus. We'd never heard anything like that. In the middle of Siberia, at the far end of the earth. It was as if the Lord was saying, "Well done, my good and faithful servants." We were in tears. It was such a beautiful experience. 3 years later, Elsa and I flew into Magadan, Russia's most far easterly city, to begin our work in earnest. The territory is so vast, 3 times the size of the US continent, that our flight from Moscow lasted 8 hours. Stalin sent millions to prison camps in Magadan precisely for its isolation. It is accessible only by air, boat, or, in season, a 4-wheel drive vehicle carrying its own fuel supply along dirt roads and on ferries. No walls or guards were needed here. There was nowhere to flee. Countless millions perished in the Siberian Gulag. Many of these were Jews and Christians banished there for practicing their faith. For me, this is the place nearest to hell on earth. And as Elsa and I looked at the run-down shacks and rubbish lying about, we could sense a depression, like a spirit of death that still hovered over the area. We felt prompted in our spirits to go on a prayer walk through parts of the city. We set out on a cold summer day. Patches of snow were still on the nearby mountain tops. We came to a high point directly overlooking the harbour, where ships had brought in the prisoners destined to die. It just gripped me, and I had such a sense that the Lord was saying, "Prophesy over this city." It was something I had never done. As we stood there, Ezekiel's vision of dry bones came to me. I opened my Bible to Ezekiel 37 verse 12 and spoke out the words.
Thus says the Lord God, "Behold, O my people, I will open your graves and cause you to come up from your graves and bring you into the land of Israel."
I was deeply stirred. Tears came to my eyes. I just knew at that moment that the Lord was calling us to call forth his sons and daughters from the ends of the earth. Elsa and I were invited to dinner in Magadan with a Jewish woman, her son, and his young wife. This family had so little, but the mother worked for 2 days to prepare a beautiful meal. She put mountains of food on the table. We felt embarrassed. It was much more than we could eat. After the meal, as our hostess poured us steaming sweet tea, I pulled out my weapon, the Bible. "Look what Moses said 3,000 years ago," I told them, turning to Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 4.
"If any of you are driven out to the farthest part under heaven, from there the Lord your God will gather you."
I paused and looked them in the eyes. "You live in the farthest part of the earth, and it is time to go home. I'll never forget I was in Odessa for our first sailing of 1996, and the son and his wife turned up. You know, he told me, when you spoke about going home to Israel, I knew it was time. They sold everything and flew to Moscow to have their papers approved by the Israeli embassy. But their plane broke down. They were left to walk long hours through the snow. They were attacked and robbed of all their money. Even some of their belongings were stolen on the train to Odessa. By the time we met them, they were devastated. But our people just loved them. When I said goodbye to them as they left to board the ship, there was new hope. We put together a team to fish for more families like this one and help them with a safe, reliable route to Israel. We met in early 1996 in Khabarovsk, the capital of Eastern Siberia, for a week of prayer and discussion, a time of mapping out our strategic plans. Our volunteers were to fan out from there in twos to spy out the land, pray, and prophetically call forth the Jewish people. The day before they were to leave, I was privileged to speak at the local Bible school and shared that we were sending out fishing teams. There were students attending who had come from the various regions. A young man came forward. I can help your people to find the Jews in my city. Others followed his lead. I could see the relief on the faces of our volunteers, who otherwise would have journeyed to these distant places not knowing a soul. This is not Europe or the United States. This is the end of the earth, where communication is often complicated or even non-existent, and foreigners are watched with suspicion. The students immediately made contact with their home churches, and all our volunteers were met on their arrival and provided with food and a bed. Truly, the Lord is the best administrator. Rarely have I felt his presence and love so much as out in that forsaken land. Our volunteers returned with glorious stories of how God cares and makes a way to reach these isolated Jews. Iveta, a Czech girl with her friend Martina, was a pioneer of our work in Siberia, told of her visit to a remote settlement. I had a prompting. The Lord told me to leave Magadan and go into the interior. I wanted to visit a settlement 600 kilometres north. There is a minibus service, a weekly one that goes high into the interior only on dirt roads. When you drive there, it is so unreal. You hold on because everything shakes all the time. The roads are full of holes. We were about 300 kilometres inland when the minibus broke down. When we opened the door, hundreds of big mosquitoes came in, and they were really hungry. I had never seen so many and such big mosquitoes in my life. The driver shook his head and said that he couldn't repair the vehicle. I knew we would be stranded for days before anyone found us. I prayed to the Lord, "Will you make a way?" Suddenly the driver looked up and said, "I have an idea." Within half an hour we drove on. When we got to the settlement, it was like a miracle, an oasis in the middle of nowhere. There was a church, and through them I found more than 30 Jewish families. Some of them had never heard anything like it when I came and said, "It's time to go home. The God of Israel, his plans for you are for good. You have a future." They knew about Israel but didn't see how they could ever make it there. We told them we would help them. Some were so surprised that we could find them because they never told anybody they were Jewish and thought nobody in the settlement knew. But people knew very well who was who. One Jewish lady was in shock when I found her and did not want to speak with me. She was closing the door and saying, "No, no, no." Then I prayed, "Lord, would you see that we have a good journey back?" Many gold mines are in this area that were once worked by prisoners. We came to a working mine and the manager said, "I need to go back to Magadan in my helicopter. I will give you a ride." And in 2 hours, I was back in Magadan. It's not an easy thing to help Jewish people in these remote areas. Just to get a photograph of them, to get their documents checked, or to get a passport can be an overwhelming task. It is a long-term process. In some cases, we must send them to other republics to research the family history and obtain proof of their Jewishness. In our first 2 years of fishing in eastern Siberia, we saw over 2,000 Olim leave for Israel. We brought them by air, bus or train. often hazardous and difficult journeys, to a small hotel in Khabarovsk to wait for Jewish agency flight. I'll always remember one little lady on crutches I met there. She was about 4'6". The team said to me, "Gustav, you must meet her. She is a special lady." And then they whispered to me, "She knows the Lord." They wanted to take a photo of us. She said, "I am too small. Let's stand next to the staircase." So she climbed up on the first step and said, "I'm still too small." She climbed up to the second step. She was on the same level with me. We photographed and had a glorious time. She was 81 years old and had practically no teeth, but her eyes were shining. She wanted to go home. Our research has shown that there are thousands of Jewish people in the Far East, from Magadan right up to the Bering Strait, a vast territory. Many Jews came as prisoners, and the survivors and their families continue to live there in exile. They often hide their Jewishness, making it impossible to know how many remain. But now they are revealing their Jewishness so that they may have a way of escape. So often, humanitarian aid is the key to get in these places and get a response. We've had 40-foot containers sent in from Western Europe and the United States. When we visit synagogues and tell the rabbis we want to share the vision of Operation Exodus, only a small number of Jewish people turn up. But if we say we are bringing aid to their people, we know that they will all turn up, and it gives us opportunity to speak about going home. One volunteer asked me, "Would you like to visit the poorest of the poor?" I said, "Yes," though I don't find it easy to go into these homes to see utter misery. We drove there with our minibus, and what moved my heart is that the children and the old ones came running out and embraced our volunteer. They had become friends, and she said, "Gustav, I have gained their confidence. Now I am going to talk to them and tell them that it is time to go home." It is not easy to earn the trust of the Russian Jews. It takes time. It takes real commitment. I always say to our volunteers, love never fails. And so we break first into fallow ground. We water it, and many times the Lord allows us to bring in the harvest. From Siberia, Elsa and I continued eastward by air to Alaska. It was a glorious day, and I took in the snow-peaked mountains, glaciers and valleys during the 6-hour flight. It reminded me of a vision numerous believers had shared, that one day large numbers of Jewish people would travel over this forsaken land across the Bering Strait to Alaska. Elsa was sitting behind me, also in a window seat, spying out the terrain from the air. The longer she looked, the more she doubted that such a land route could be possible. There would be elderly people, children, invalids, she thought. Wild animals inhabit the region, such as Siberian tigers, bears and wolves. "Lord," she said in her spirit, "if this is of you, please give me a sign." As she continued to look out, she saw a picture formed by the mountains, valleys and crevices below. It was a large eagle with outstretched wings. Suddenly she remembered God's word to Moses in Exodus 19, verse 4.
"You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings, and brought you to myself."
I had the joy of speaking in a church in Alaska and sharing the possibility of an exodus across the Bering Strait. It was another of those electric meetings. The pastor came forward and said, "We as a church have already made preparations to welcome the Jews when they come. Could circumstances really require such an escape route?" I learned one lesson on our first Trans-Siberian train journey that I've never forgotten. It happened on the border of Mongolia. The train came to a stop in a city called Chita. I asked Elsa to buy some bread while I wanted to take a few photographs. I had 2 small cameras, one for prints and one for slides. As I was taking these pictures, I saw that my wife couldn't get anywhere near this wooden stall. Everybody was pushing. We were not in Britain there. And so I came and used my elbows, I admit, more effectively. I got to the front and put my cameras down to pay for the bread when I realised our train was slowly moving out of the station. In this part of the country, a passenger train leaves only every 3 days. Elsa and I started running. We caught up to a rear compartment of the train, climbed on, and made our way forward to our own car. I settled down, holding the 2 loaves of bread. "Oh no!" I cried. "I've left the cameras behind." I was furious with myself. Both cameras gone. So I went to find an in-tourist guide on the train and asked whether there was a lost and found office to report it. She laughed. Something like that doesn't exist in Russia. As I was still brooding over my loss, the Lord spoke to me and said, "So it will be with the Jews who are not going now. They will run for their lives and leave everything behind." Kjell Sjöberg once told me that he was praying aloud about our work as he walked in a Swedish forest. Suddenly a hunter appeared. "Would you please be quiet?" he demanded. "You're disturbing the animals." Kjell saw it as a prophetic sign. Anti-Semitism is not over. A young Jewish man we were helping to make Aliyah in Far Eastern Siberia was murdered 6 days before he was due to fly to Tel Aviv. A month previously, the couple heading the Jewish agency office in another Siberian city were badly beaten and robbed by men who told them, "You have paid for your guilt to Russia. Now you can go to Israel." Our team helped them leave 6 days later. Ultra-nationalist groups are openly inciting against the Jews in Siberia. I have seen signs on walls in cities. I have seen newspapers where they call for the extinction of the Jews. I have a strong sense we are in a countdown. This is borne out by many of our intercessors who have picked up in the spirit that we are heading for turbulent times. The Lord has imprinted on us Zechariah chapter 2 verse 6.
Up, up, flee from the land of the north.
One night in our Bournemouth office, the clock fell from the wall, smashed to the floor, and stopped working, the hands pointing at less than 2 minutes before midnight. We kept it as a reminder. Sometimes we have tried to convey this to the Jews. Many were not ready to accept it. It's a human trait to hope that things will get better. Many told us, "I will be the last one to go." When Elsa told our Jewish partners in Odessa that the empty cabins on the 1993 sailings could mean Jewish lives one day, they thought she was over the top. Zionist activist Vladimir Jabotinsky received the same response when he attempted to warn European Jews in the 1930s. Not only in Alaska, but as I have travelled throughout North America and Europe, I have come across churches, fellowships, and individual believers who are making preparations to help the Jewish people on their way home. A friend shared a dream in which he saw how they were persecuted, how they could not even escape from one country to the next. He saw bloodshed and terrible scenes. There was only one safe destination, Israel. When he woke, he wept before the Lord and asked why there was no one to help his people. The Lord showed him a big world map with many little flashing lights, and he realised these were the Bible-believing Christians who would help the Jewish people on their way home. In our generation, as in the Holocaust, Christians may once again be challenged to lay down their lives for the kinsfolk of Messiah. "Inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these my brethren," the King will answer us one day, "you did it to me."